Today, we're diving into the mind of Simone de Beauvoir. She was a philosopher whose work didn't just, challenge the status quo. It completely rewrote the rulebook on feminism, on freedom, and on what it even means to be a woman. Her ideas didn't just cause a stir, they literally started a revolution.
This is the sentence, the one that blew everything wide open. It's from her 1949 masterpiece, The Second Sex. And this one single idea became the bedrock for generations of feminist thought. It's so simple, incredibly powerful, and, well, profoundly challenging.
Right? What is she really saying here? I mean, to get the quote, you have to get the woman behind it. So let's do that. Let's trace the journey of the mind that dared to write those words. So our story has to start with her early life, back in a childhood where the seeds of both rebellion and this incredible intellectual rigor were first planted. Beauvoir was, well, a genius right from the get-go. Just look at this timeline. At 14, she completely abandons her faith, and by 21, she becomes the youngest person ever to pass this ridiculously difficult philosophy exam, the aggregation, beating out a lot of her male peers. And this is so important, her teaching career gave her something that very few women of her class had, and that was economic independence. And right here, in her own words, she tells us the exact source of that intellectual fire. Her childhood wasn't peaceful. She called it a disequilibrium, this constant clash between her father's more worldly views and her mother's super devout Catholicism. She says that internal conflict is what forged her into a thinker. Okay, so you absolutely cannot talk about Beauvoir without talking about Jean-Paul Sartre. Their relationship, it wasn't just a romance. It was a 51-year intellectual and existential partnership that pretty much defined both of their lives. And you can really see the span of that bond in these photos. I mean, look at them. From these young, intense students on the left who look like they're ready to take on the entire world, to the established global figures on the right. Their connection was the one constant through decades of massive social and political change. And they totally rejected traditional norms. They called their bond a soul partnership. Now, what that meant was they were primary partners, but they never got married, they never lived together, and they were explicitly not exclusive. This whole pact was designed to guarantee both of them absolute freedom to pursue their work and their lives without any constraints. And here's her logic straight from her. For Beauvoir, marriage wasn't some romantic ideal. It was a dangerous, alienating institution that trapped people. Her rejecting it, that wasn't just a lifestyle choice. For her, it was a philosophical stand. It was that same rejection of society's rules that fueled the work that would cement her legacy. A book she published in 1949 that became the foundational text for a whole new wave of feminism. Le Deuxième Sexe, The Second Sex. This thing was a massive 2-volume investigation into the history, biology, and mythology of womanhood. And when it came out, it was scandalous. The Vatican actually placed it on the Index of Forbidden Books. I mean, you've hit a nerve when that happens. Okay, so her central argument was this concept of woman as the other. And this was revolutionary. It wasn't just about social roles. It revealed how the very structure of our language and our thought is built on a male default. Man is seen as the norm, the subject. Woman, on the other hand, is defined only by her relationship to him. She is the second sex, the incidental, the other. And like Beauvoir pointed out, this wasn't new. Thinkers like Aristotle literally defined a female as just a male with a lack of qualities. And this brings us right back to that famous quote. This slide breaks down the distinction she was the first to really lay out so clearly. Sex, she said, is the biological reality, but gender, well, that's the whole set of meanings, myths, and expectations that society builds on top of that reality. A woman isn't born with these so-called feminine traits. She is taught them. She becomes a woman. So, if woman is a social construct, then what's the path to freedom? Well, for an existentialist like Beauvoir, the answer was choice. She argued that women were often forced into immanence, just a passive existence defined by their roles. The goal was to achieve transcendence, to actively define yourself through your own projects and actions, to claim your own freedom. But, the legacy of a revolutionary thinker is almost never simple. Beauvoir's impact is absolutely undeniable, but her life story is also marked by some really serious controversy. On the one hand, her influence was profoundly positive. I mean, it's undeniable. The second sex directly inspired leaders of second-wave feminism, from Betty Friedan in the US to thinkers all over the world. Her ideas are still central to gender studies today. And she wasn't just a theorist, she was an activist. She famously signed a manifesto admitting to an illegal abortion to demand that it be legalized in France. But this intellectual champion of female liberation has a much darker, much more complicated side to her personal history. And it's one that stands in really stark contrast to the freedom she wrote about so powerfully. Multiple former students have accused both Beauvoir and Sartre of grooming and sexually exploiting them when they were underage pupils. In 1943, she actually lost her teaching license over an accusation of seducing a 17-year-old. And then, much later in life, in 1977, she signed a petition in France that argued for the release of men who were arrested for having sex with minors. It's important to say these are not just rumors. They are documented and deeply troubling parts of her biography. In the end, this is where she was buried, right next to Sartre, their pact fulfilled until death itself. Her grave is still a site of pilgrimage for people inspired by her revolutionary work. But the controversies of her life cast a really long and complicated shadow, even over her final resting place. And that leaves us with the essential question, doesn't it? Can we, or even should we, separate the philosopher from the philosopher? How do we hold on to the power of her liberating ideas while also fully acknowledging the disturbing truths of how she lived her life? There's no easy answer, and that, right there, is the complex, challenging legacy of Simone de Beauvoir.